The void between star systems burned with the light of 1,000,000 dying ships. Admiral Kethavar watched through the reinforced viewing port of his flagship as another wave of hegemony vessels exploded in brilliant orange flowers of destruction. The metallic taste of recycled air filled his mouth as he gripped the command rail with forearms, his chitinous shell reflecting the strobing combat lights. Status report. He clicked in the ancient tongue of his people. Sector 7 is lost, my lord, his tactical officer reported, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. The hegemony forces have broken through our third defensive line. Casualties, extensive. Kethavar's compound eyes tracked the holographic display floating before him. Red markers, enemy ships, swarmed like angry insects across the three-dimensional battlefield. Blue markers, his own forces, flickered and died with alarming frequency. 800,000 years. That's how long this war had raged across the galaxy. His species, the proud Zekthari, had been fighting the Hegemony Alliance for so long that the original cause was lost to legend. Some said it began over mining rights to a dead world. Others claimed it started when a Hegemony diplomat insulted a Zekthari queen. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was survival. Sir? Communications Officer Rickson's voice cracked with static interference. We're receiving a transmission from the outer perimeter. Unknown contact approaching it. This can't be right. What is it? Kethavar's mandibles clicked impatiently. Single vessel, sir. Moving at impossible speed. It's requesting permission to dock. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of dying systems and the distant rumble of explosions echoing through the ship's hull. In 800 millennia of war, no single ship had ever requested permission to dock during active combat. It was either suicide or madness. Species identification, Kethavar demanded. Rickson's antennae twitched nervously. Unknown, sir. They're transmitting in. Wait. It's an old language. Very old. They call themselves humans. A collective intake of breath swept across the bridge. Humans were a myth, a legend told to young soldiers during the quiet hours between battles. Ancient texts spoke of a species that had vanished from the galaxy before the war began. Explorers who had traveled beyond the galactic rim and never returned. Admiral, his weapons officer interrupted. Long-range sensors are detecting massive hegemony reinforcements jumping in from hyperspace. 3 battle fleets, sir. We're outnumbered 50-1. Kethavar's primary eyes focused on the tactical display while his secondary eyes monitored the communication station. The red markers were multiplying, surrounding his fleet like a closing fist. In 30 minutes, maybe less, they would all be dead. Patch me through to this human vessel, he decided. What did they have to lose? The main viewer flickered to life, revealing a face unlike anything Kethavar had ever seen. Pale skin, bilateral symmetry, 2 eyes set in a forward-facing configuration. The creature, the human, appeared young by galactic standards, with short dark hair and wearing some kind of simple uniform. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth vessel Prometheus HFY, the human said, her voice carrying an odd musical quality. We've been monitoring your conflict from the edge of the system. We'd like to help. Kethavar's mandibles spread in what might have been confusion or amusement. You offer aid? 1 ship against 3 hegemony battle fleets? 1 ship is all we need, Captain Chen replied with quiet confidence. Admiral, may I ask how long this war has been going on? 800,000 years, Kethavar answered automatically, then realized how absurd it sounded. Something flickered across the human's face. An expression Kethavar couldn't interpret. Sadness? Disappointment? That's a very long time to be fighting, Captain Chen said softly. Too long. Admiral, I'm going to need you to pull your forces back to minimum safe distance. What we're about to do? Well, it's going to be bright. Captain Chen, Kethavar began, but alarms started blaring across his bridge. Admiral, his sensor operator, called out. Hegemony forces are beginning their final assault. 15 minutes until they're in firing range of our position. On the view screen, Captain Chen nodded grimly. Then we're just in time. Admiral, trust me. Pull back your ships. All of them now. Something in her voice, a certainty that transcended species barriers, made Kethvar's decision for him. All ships fall back to perimeter positions. Emergency withdrawal. Sir? His tactical officer questioned. Do it. As the Zekthari fleet began its retreat, Kethvar watched the human ship on his sensors. It was small, barely a frigate by galactic standards, and moving with purpose toward the center of the battlefield where 3 hegemony battle fleets were converging like the jaws of some cosmic predator. The Prometheus accelerated, and Kethvar's sensors registered energy readings that made no sense. The ship's power output was climbing exponentially, far beyond what its size should have allowed. What kind of weapons do they carry? He whispered to himself. On the view screen, Captain Chen's image flickered as interference increased. Admiral, tell me, in 800,000 years of war, has anyone ever asked why you're fighting? Before Kethvar could answer, the human ship disappeared from sensors entirely, and then the stars began to change. Chapter 2. The Prometheus Reveals. Its true nature Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Prometheus, her hands steady, on the command console despite the magnitude of what she was about to unleash. Around her, the bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency that came from years of training and absolute trust in their mission. Combat systems online, reported Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb, his fingers dancing across tactical displays. Quantum, field generators at 98%. Navigation confirms we're at optimal position, added Navigator Yuki Tanaka. All civilian vessels are clear of the engagement zone, Sarah nodded, her gaze fixed on the forward display where 3 hegemony battle fleets were massing for their final assault on the Zekthari forces. Thousands of ships, millions of beings, all caught in a cycle of violence that had consumed 8 centuries of galactic history. Dr. Okafor, she called to the ship's chief science officer, remind me of the projections. Dr. Amara Okafor, a tall woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes that had seen too much, consulted her tablet. Based on current force dispositions and historical combat effectiveness, the Zekthari fleet will be completely destroyed within 12 minutes of engagement. Hegemony casualties will be moderate, approximately 15%. And tomorrow? Tomorrow, the hegemony will attack the next Zekthari stronghold. The pattern will continue. Conservative estimates suggest the war will rage for another 1,000,000 years before one side achieves total victory. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of decision. When humanity had returned to the galaxy after their long journey, beyond the rim, they had found a civilization locked in perpetual conflict. The Prometheus represented something new, a hope that cycles could be broken. All stations, this is the captain, she announced over the ship's intercom. We are about to engage the hegemony fleets. Remember, our goal is not destruction but demonstration. We want to preserve as many lives as possible while making it clear that this war must end. She opened a channel to Admiral Kethvar's flagship. The Zekthari commander appeared on screen, his compound eyes reflecting worry and desperate hope. Admiral, I need to ask you something, Sarah said. If you could end this war right now, not by winning but by stopping it entirely, would you? Kethvar's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. Captain, my people have dreamed of peace for 800 millennia, but the hegemony will never accept terms. They fight for total dominance. What if dominance became irrelevant? What if there was a third option? Before the Admiral could respond, the proximity alarms aboard the Prometheus began chiming. The hegemony fleets had detected their position and were moving to investigate. Captain, Marcus reported, we're receiving multiple targeting locks. They're treating us as hostile. Sarah sighed. Of course they are. Open a channel to the hegemony fleet commanders. The main display split into 3 sections, showing the bridge of each hegemony flagship. The commanders were as different as the species that comprised their alliance. A crystalline Veltar, a gaseous Zhuk contained in an environmental suit, and something that looked like a living plant with glowing fruit-like organs. Unknown vessel. The Veltar commander spoke first, its voice like wind chimes in a storm. You are interfering in a lawful military operation. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed. This is Captain Chen of the Earth vessel. Prometheus, Sarah replied calmly. I'm here to propose an end to your war. The plant-like being's fruit organs pulsed with agitated light. There can be no peace with the Zekthari murderers. They must be eliminated. And they say the same about you, Sarah pointed out. 800,000 years of they must be eliminated has gotten you, what exactly? More death? More destruction? More generations born into a galaxy at war? The Zekthari are an inferior species. The Zhuk commander spoke through its translator. The galaxy will be ordered under hegemony rule. Sarah felt a familiar anger rise in her chest, the same fury that had driven humanity to the galactic rim when they first encountered the endless wars of the inner systems. But she controlled it, channeled it into purpose. Dr. Okafor, she said quietly, begin the demonstration. Aboard the Prometheus, deep in the ship's core, systems that had been developed during humanity's exile began to hum with power. The ship's fusion reactors were impressive by galactic standards, but they were merely the backup systems. The real power came from something far more exotic, a quantum singularity contained within fields that bent spacetime itself. Energy output climbing, reported Chief Engineer Patricia Santos from the engine room. Quantum field coherence is stable. We're ready, Captain. All hands brace for quantum field activation, Sarah announced. The hegemony fleet commanders were still arguing about jurisdiction and military protocol when the Prometheus simply vanished from their sensors, not cloaked, gone, completely, absent from spacetime. Admiral Kethvar, watching from his flagship's bridge, saw the human ship disappear and felt his heart sink. Had they fled? Abandoned the battlefield like so many others before them? Then the stars began to bend. Space around the three hegemony fleets started to warp and twist, as if reality itself was being reshaped by invisible hands. Ships that had been separated by thousands of kilometers suddenly found themselves side by side. Navigation systems went haywire as up and down became meaningless concepts. What's happening? The Veltar commander demanded, but his transmission was cut off as his flagship was gently but irresistibly moved away from the battle formation. Inside the quantum field, the Prometheus existed in a state of controlled probability. Sarah could see the battlefield from multiple dimensional perspectives simultaneously, past, present, and potential futures, spreading out like branches of a vast tree. Target acquisition complete, Marcus reported. All hegemony vessels locked. Weapon. Systems are unusual readings, Captain, Sarah smiled. That's because we're not targeting their ships, Marcus. We're targeting their ability to fight. What happened next would be debated by galactic historians for generations. In the span of 57 seconds, every weapon system on every hegemony ship simply stopped working. Not destroyed, not disabled, transformed. Particle beam emitters became stellar cartography sensors. Missile launchers became communication arrays. Defensive shields became atmospheric processors. The ships remained intact, their crews unharmed, but their capacity for violence had been fundamentally altered at the quantum level. But that was only the beginning. The Prometheus rematerialized at the center of the battlefield, but now it wasn't alone. Surrounding it were a dozen other ships, sleek, elegant vessels that seemed to be made of crystallized starlight. Admiral Kethvar, Sarah's voice came over the communication channel, calm and steady. May I introduce the Peacekeeper fleet? They've been waiting a very long time to meet you. As the Zekthari commander watched in amazement, beings began materializing on his bridge, but not through transporters or any technology he recognized. They simply stepped out of the air, as if walking through invisible doorways. They were human, but somehow more than human. Their eyes held depths that spoke of eons of experience, and when they moved, reality seemed to bend slightly around them. Admiral, one of them said in perfect Zekthari, we have much to discuss. Chapter 3. The weight of truth. Admiral Kethvar found himself facing three beings who claimed to be human, but seemed to carry the weight of stars in their eyes. The leader, a woman with silver hair and skin that seemed to shimmer with its own light, stepped forward. "I am Dr. Elena Vasquez," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated in Cathvar's exoskeleton. "I was the chief scientist aboard, the original human exploration fleet that left the galaxy 850,000 years ago." Cathvar's compound eyes focused on her. "Impossible. No being lives that long." Dr. Vasquez smiled sadly. "You're correct. No being should live that long. But when we reached the galactic rim, we found something that changed us. Something that changed everything." Behind her, holographic displays materialized in the air, showing star charts and energy patterns beyond anything in Zekthari science. The images hurt to look at directly, as if they contained too much information for normal minds to process. "We found the source," she continued. "The origin point of consciousness in this universe, a place where thought becomes reality, where time flows backward, where all possibilities exist simultaneously." "The architects," breathed Rickson, the communications officer. It was a word from the deepest mythology of his people, beings who supposedly created the laws of physics themselves. "Not creators," Dr. Vasquez corrected. "Gardeners. They planted seeds of consciousness throughout the galaxy, then withdrew to let those seeds grow naturally. But something went wrong." The holographic display shifted, showing the spiral arms of their galaxy. But instead of the usual distribution of inhabited systems, Cathvar saw vast sections highlighted in red, dead zones where consciousness had been extinguished. "War," said another of the humans, a dark-skinned man whose eyes seemed to contain swirling galaxies. Endless, purposeless conflict that consumed species after species. The architects called it the plague of contradiction, the tendency of conscious beings to define themselves by what they oppose rather than what they support. "We were sent back," Dr. Vasquez continued, "but not as conquerors or judges, as healers. Our mission is to break the cycles of violence that have trapped entire civilizations in patterns of mutual destruction." Admiral Cathvar's mandibles clicked, nervously. "You expect me to believe that you've returned from beyond the rim to end our war, one ship against the combined might of two galactic powers?" "One ship," the third human agreed, a woman whose hair seemed to be made of living starlight. "Carrying the weight of absolute certainty." She gestured, and the viewing port's image changed. Instead of showing the battlefield outside, it displayed a vast chamber filled with beings unlike anything Cathvar had ever imagined. Creatures of pure energy, living geometric forms, entities that existed in more dimensions than his mind could grasp. "The Galactic Council of Consciousness," Dr. Vasquez explained. "Representatives from every species that has ever achieved sapience in this galaxy, including yours, Admiral, including the hegemony races." Cathvar stared at the display. Among the incomprehensible alien forms, he could see figures that looked unmistakably like his own people, but different somehow. Calmer. "Wiser. Impossible," he whispered. "If such a council existed, we would know." "You do know," the starlight-haired woman said gently. "Every child born to your species carries the genetic memory of peace. Every hegemony youngling dreams of harmony before they're taught to hate. The council exists in the quantum substrate of consciousness itself, the level where all minds touch the source of being." The holographic display zoomed in on specific figures in the council chamber. Cathvar could see what appeared to be Zekthari and hegemony representatives sitting side by side, their body language suggesting not just peace, but genuine collaboration. "These are the aspects of your species that remember what you were before the war began," Dr. Vasquez explained. "They've been trying to reach you for 800,000 years, but the noise of conflict drowns out their voices." Outside, the Prometheus hung motionless in space, surrounded by the 12 ships of the Peacekeeper fleet. The hegemony vessels had been gently but firmly moved to a safe distance, their crews struggling to understand what had happened to their weapons. On the bridge of the Prometheus, Captain Chen monitored the situation with growing concern. The quantum field that had allowed them to disable the hegemony weapons was stable, but it was also broadcasting their presence across multiple dimensions. Other powers in the galaxy, darker powers, would soon take notice. "Captain," Dr. Okafor reported, "I'm detecting quantum resonance cascades in sectors 12 through 18. Something big is responding to our demonstration." Sarah nodded. Grimly, she had hoped they would have more time, but the universe rarely cooperated with even the best-laid plans. "How long until they arrive?" 17 minutes, assuming they maintain current approach velocity. "Who are they?" asked Marcus, studying his tactical displays. Dr. Okafor's expression darkened. "The Devourers, the reason we really left the galaxy all those millennia ago." The bridge fell silent. Even during humanity's long exile, the Devourers had been spoken of only in whispers, a force of pure entropy that consumed not just matter and energy, but consciousness itself. They turned thinking beings into hollow automatons, drained civilizations of their very capacity for growth and change. They've been waiting, Sarah realized. All this time, they've been waiting for someone to demonstrate advanced consciousness manipulation technology. "The war," Marcus said, understanding dawning in his voice. "It was never random, was it? The Zekthari and hegemony didn't just happen to start fighting 800,000 years ago." "No," Sarah confirmed. "The Devourers planted the seeds of conflict, then withdrew to let the civilizations weaken themselves. When we returned to the galaxy, when we began demonstrating our abilities, we triggered their return." She opened a channel to Dr. Vasquez aboard the Zekthari flagship. "Elena, we have a problem. The real enemy is coming." On the Zekthari bridge, Dr. Vasquez received the transmission with visible tension. She turned to Admiral Kethvar with an expression of urgent seriousness. "Admiral, everything I've told you is true, but it's not the complete truth. Your war, the 800,000 years of conflict between your people and the hegemony, it was orchestrated. You've been fighting each other while the real threat has been growing stronger in the dark spaces between stars." Kethvar felt a chill that had nothing to do with his ship's failing life support systems. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that in approximately 15 minutes, beings will arrive who make your current enemies look like children playing with toys, and the only chance any of us have of surviving is if every conscious being in this system stops fighting each other and starts fighting for consciousness itself." The holographic display changed again, showing sensor readings from the edge of the system. Dark shapes were moving through hyperspace, not ships in any recognizable sense, but geometries that bent space-time around them like wounds in reality. "The Devourers," Dr. Vasquez said simply. "They've come to harvest what 800,000 years of war has prepared for them, an entire galactic sector weakened by perpetual conflict." Admiral Kethvar looked at the approaching darkness, then at his communications officer. "Rickson, open a channel to the hegemony fleet commanders." "Sir?" "All of them, and Patch and Captain Chen aboard the human ship." He paused, his ancient soldier's instincts warring with 800 millennia of ingrained hatred. "If we're going to die, we die as conscious beings, not as the Devourer's cattle." But even as he gave the order, Kethvar wondered if 800,000 years of war had left any civilization in the galaxy capable of remembering how to fight as allies rather than enemies. Outside, the darkness between stars began to move. Chapter 4. The battle for consciousness itself, the combined fleet, hung in space like a fragile flower of light against the approaching darkness. Admiral Kethvar had never imagined he would see Zekthari and hegemony ships flying in formation, their crews working together with the desperate efficiency of beings who had suddenly realized they faced extinction. "Status report, Captain Chen," requested from the Prometheus, which now served as the fleet's tactical command center. "Zekthari forces report all available ships combat ready," Admiral Kethvar transmitted. "Weapons are limited due to battle damage, but our pilots are experienced." The Veltar commander's crystalline voice chimed in. "Hegemony fleet stand ready. Our ships were modified by your demonstration, but we've adapted our systems for defensive operations." Dr. Vasquez materialized on the Prometheus bridge through one of her impossible dimensional steps, her expression grim. The Devourers will arrive in 47 seconds. Everyone needs to understand what we're facing. The main display shifted to show tactical data that made even experienced military officers step back in shock. The approaching entities weren't ships. They were living void spaces, regions where reality itself had been consumed and converted into something hostile to consciousness. They don't destroy matter, Dr. Vasquez explained. They corrupt it. Any being they touch becomes an extension of their will, alive but no longer truly conscious. They've been spreading through the galaxy for millions of years, turning entire civilizations into shells of themselves. How do we fight something like that? Asked Marcus, studying the impossible geometries on his tactical display. With the one thing they can't consume, she replied. Genuine cooperation. The Devourers can corrupt individual consciousness, but they cannot touch the connections between conscious beings who choose to work together. Admiral Kethvar felt his compound eyes tracking the sensor readings. You mean to say that our war, 800,000 years of conflict, was preparation for this? In a way, yes. The Devourers wanted you weakened, divided, suspicious of each other, but they also wanted you to develop military technology and tactics. They've been fattening you up for harvest. A new voice crackled over the communications system, rough, mechanical, speaking in a language that hurt to hear. It was the sound of consciousness being ground into component parts and reassembled wrong. Creatures of flesh and thought, the voice said. You have demonstrated abilities that belong to us. Submit to processing, and your termination will be efficient. Captain Chen opened a fleet-wide channel. All ships, all crews. What you're about to see will challenge everything you think you know about reality. Remember, stay connected to each other. No matter what happens, keep talking. Keep thinking together. The first Devourer ship materialized at the edge of the system, and immediately the laws of physics began to change around it. Stars dimmed, space-time twisted, and the quantum foundations of matter started to decay. My God, whispered Dr. Okafor, studying her readings. It's not just a ship, it's a mobile entropy field. Everywhere it goes, the universe becomes less ordered, less capable of supporting consciousness. The Devourer vessel moved toward the combined fleet with impossible speed, space folding around it like water around a stone. As it approached, the crews of every ship began to feel the effects. Thoughts becoming sluggish, emotions flattening, the spark of creativity and curiosity that defined consciousness starting to fade. Now, Captain Chen commanded. The Peacekeeper fleet moved as one, their crystalline hulls blazing with contained starlight. But instead of attacking the Devourer directly, they surrounded the combined Zekthari and Hegemony forces, creating a protective shell of coherent quantum fields. All ships, Dr. Vasquez broadcast, link your navigation computers to the Peacekeeper network. We're going to do something that's never been attempted before. What followed challenged the understanding of every military tactician in the fleet. Instead of individual ships maneuvering independently, the entire combined force began to move as a single organism. Zekthari fighters flew in perfect harmony with Hegemony destroyers, their movements coordinated not by traditional command structures, but by direct consciousness-to-consciousness communication. The Devourer responded by spawning smaller versions of itself, scout ships that moved like drops of liquid darkness through space. Each one carried the same reality-warping field, the same consciousness-crushing effect. They're trying to surround us, reported the Zhuk commander, his voice steady despite the cosmic horror bearing down on them. Let them try, Admiral Kethvar replied. And for the first time in 800,000 years, he felt something other than weary resignation. Fighting alongside former enemies, connected to minds that had been alien just hours before, he felt hope. The battle that followed couldn't be described in conventional terms. Ships that should have been destroyed by entropy fields somehow maintained their coherence. Weapons that should have been useless against reality-warping opponents found their targets with impossible accuracy. Pilots who had been trying to kill Each other that morning now saved each other's lives with split-second precision. "It's working," Dr. Okafor reported with amazement. "The quantum coherence field is holding. The Devourers can't corrupt individual consciousness when it's networked with others." But even as the combined fleet held off the scout ships, more Devourer vessels were materializing throughout the system. Dozens of them, each one a wound in space-time, each one broadcasting the same entropy field that turned conscious beings into hollow automatons. "There are too many," the plant-like hegemony commander admitted, his fruit organs pulsing with exhausted light. "We cannot maintain this level of coordination indefinitely." Captain Chen studied the tactical display, her mind racing through possibilities. The quantum network was holding, but barely. Each Devourer ship added to the entropy field, making it harder for the networked consciousness to maintain coherence. "Dr. Vasquez," she said, "you mentioned that consciousness touches a source beyond individual minds. Can we access that source directly?" The silver-haired woman's eyes widened. "Sarah, what you're suggesting, it's theoretically possible, but the risks of not trying are worse," Chen replied. "How do we do it?" "Every conscious being in the fleet would need to voluntarily surrender their individual identity and merge temporarily with the galactic consciousness substrate. It would be like becoming part of the universe's own immune system." Admiral Kethvar, monitoring the conversation from his flagship, felt his compound eyes focusing on something beyond the battlefield. In the quantum network, he could sense the minds of beings he had considered enemies for his entire existence. But now, connected to them through the peacekeeper fields, he could feel their hopes, their fears, their deep desire for peace. "If it will end this," he said, "I volunteer." "As do I," added the Veltar commander. One by one, every captain, every crew member, every conscious being in the fleet volunteered to surrender their individual identity for the chance to preserve consciousness itself. "All right," Captain Chen said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. "Dr. Vasquez, begin the merge." What happened next would be remembered in the legends of a dozen species. For exactly 57 seconds, the distinction between individual minds disappeared. Zekthari and hegemony, human and alien, all became part of something larger, a single coherent field of consciousness that spanned the entire star system. In that moment of perfect unity, they touched the source that Dr. Vasquez had described. They felt the presence of every conscious being who had ever lived, the vast network of minds that connected all sapient species across space and time. And through that connection, they spoke with one voice to the Devourers. "You are not welcome." Here, the entropy fields collapsed. The reality warping effects ceased. The Devourer ships, faced with a level of consciousness coherence they had never encountered, simply left. Not destroyed, not defeated, but convinced that this sector of the galaxy was no longer suitable for harvest. As individual awareness returned, Captain Chen found herself surrounded by the faces of beings who had been strangers hours before, but now felt like family. The quantum network was fading, but the connections it had created remained. "Is it over?" Admiral Kethvar asked, his voice carrying 800,000 years of weariness. "The immediate threat, yes," Dr. Vasquez replied. "But the real work is just beginning." Epilogue. A new dawn 6 months after the Battle of Consciousness, the Nexus station orbited a neutral star at the border between former Zekthari and hegemony territories. The station itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering. Crystalline Veltar architecture merged seamlessly with organic Zekthari biotechnology and human quantum field generators. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck, watching ships from a dozen species dock at the station's ports. Trade vessels, scientific expeditions, diplomatic shuttles, all carrying beings who had spent millennia defining themselves as enemies and were now learning to work together. "Status report," she said to Admiral Kethvar, who had accepted the position of Joint Military Coordinator for the new Galactic Cooperative. "3 more systems have requested membership this week," he replied, his mandibles clicking with what she had learned was his species' equivalent of a smile. The hegemony council has officially dissolved their empire structure and voted to participate in the cooperative governance model. And the war? What war? He asked, gesturing at the peaceful scene outside the viewport. Young beings are being born who will never know what it means to live in a galaxy at war. Dr. Vasquez approached, carrying a data tablet filled with reports from scientific teams across the galaxy. The Peacekeeper fleet has made contact with 17 species we thought were extinct. Turns out they were just hiding from the war, waiting for it to end. Any sign of the Devourers returning? None. The quantum consciousness network we established seems to be holding. Every time a new species joins the cooperative, the network grows stronger. She paused, studying her readings. There's something else, though. We're detecting signs of similar networks forming in other galaxies. Word is spreading. Captain Chen nodded, feeling a deep satisfaction that went beyond personal accomplishment. When humanity had first left the galaxy, they had been fleeing the endless wars between alien civilizations. Now they had returned to find those wars transformed into the foundation for something unprecedented, a truly galactic community based on cooperation rather than domination. Captain, a young communications officer approached. We're receiving a transmission from Earth. The Council wants to know if you're ready to come home. Sarah looked out at the bustling station, at the ships, representing dozens of species learning to work together, at the stars that no longer blazed with the light of perpetual warfare. Tell them, she said, that we are home. In the months that followed, historians would debate the exact sequence of events that ended 800,000 years of galactic warfare in less than an hour. Military tacticians would study the battle of consciousness, trying to understand how a single human ship had neutralized 3 battle fleets without firing a shot. But the beings who lived through it knew the truth was simpler and more profound than any tactical analysis could capture. They had learned that consciousness, when connected rather than isolated, was stronger than any weapon. They had discovered that cooperation was not just a moral choice, but an evolutionary advantage. They had found that the enemy they had been fighting for 800 millennia was not each other, but the fear and isolation that made them believe they had to fight each other. The Prometheus still patrolled the space lanes between stars, but now it was accompanied by ships from every member species of the Galactic Cooperative. Its mission remained the same: to seek out civilizations trapped in cycles of violence and show them a different path. Because somewhere in the vast cosmos, other wars were raging. Other species were trapped in their own 800,000-year cycles of conflict. And somewhere out there, other devourers were waiting to harvest the consciousness of beings too divided to defend themselves. But now, they knew it was possible to break the cycle. One ship, carrying the right message at the right moment, could end a war that had seemed eternal. And in a galaxy where consciousness could touch the source of all being, one voice speaking for cooperation instead of domination could change everything. The stars no longer burned with the light of war. Instead, they shone with the hope of what conscious beings could accomplish when they chose to work together rather than tear each other apart. 800,000 years of war had ended in 50 minutes. The age of cooperation had begun.